Hello and welcome to another episode of Pivot Points Rant. I'm Dennis,
And I'm Brian.
and tonight we're going to be discussing casual racism.
Oh boy, I hadn't heard the topic before now for those of you out there. Um, so this shouldn't be a landmine field at all.
No, not at all.
No casual
no
racism.
minefield whatsoever involved here. In fact, it's a topic that I picked largely because I don't think the parties involved will ever bother to listen to this.
No. And if you're here, hello.
Hello. No. Hello. I hope you listen to this, and I hope you understand just how awful it is when you say these things.
I can agree with you that it's something we should probably talk about. God, it's so hard to approach this, right? Because casual racism is one of the biggest things that people will jump to defend themselves over.
Right.
Just it's so difficult.
In this particular case, the reason why this is on my mind right now is I was recently at a get-together, and tossed around was a term that is extremely derogatory towards anybody of Hispanic descent, very casually in conversation.
Too derogatory to say, I'm guessing?
No, well, it's terrible. It really is.
Right.
The phrase I'm going to describe is in this case used to describe either areas that are populated primarily of Hispanic descent, people of Hispanic descent, or to describe people of Hispanic descent. And they will call those areas Taco Town and tacos, respectively.
God, it's so unimaginative. Like, all racism is really, but that is particularly crappy.
Right. It's so lazy and yet so disgusting at the same time.
Right. That's almost even worse. Come on, guys. Fuck.
I know.
You're going to piss me off about something that, I normally wouldn't even give the time of day because it's so shitty and but then you got to throw racism into it, so now I'm engaged. Fucking come on.
Right. And mind you, this is from people that will regularly assert the fact that they are not racist.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the diet racism trope, right? I'm not racist, but
well, because you're not walking around with a hood over your head, so therefore you're not racist.
Right.
That to them is the measure of racism, and they don't see how those seemingly small things are really indicators of some terrible mindsets on their part.
Yeah, and I won't even go into all of the details because really, if you get down into the nitty gritty, people can be racist even about things that they're not necessarily being openly shitty about. I mean, that's being openly shitty. I think you call something a taco town, you're being shitty.
You would think so. You would think so. I don't know.
Would they call it a taco town if there was someone of Hispanic descent that was hanging out at the party? You think?
Right, exactly. That's actually a good question. I don't think so. I think more than likely not. And in fact, I've seen one of the people in question that uses this type of terminology. They also have a tendency of making similarly derogatory comments about anybody of African American descent,
of course,
whenever they see them. But I've seen them, when we've had an African American friend over for a party or something like that, then suddenly they no longer make those comments.
Yeah. Well, that's something I've run into too. I mean, I've seen, let's see, I don't want to get too much into personal details, so it's difficult for me. I was living in an area that was in proximity to Chicago at one time. And so there weren't a whole lot of black people living in the town. And those people who were living in the town, I mean, they were just, your average American citizen, super great. Right. I used to work DirecTV in that area, so I talked to pretty much everybody in town, anybody who was getting their cable set up at least. So,
right.
I kept hearing something when I was in the town that I had never really heard before, and it was people referencing people from Chicago. And it was what the hell is a person from, how do you know they're from Chicago? you're obviously talking about people you haven't spoken to. So
Right.
how do you know they're from Chicago? And, you know, you hear it for long enough, you put two and two together, you're like, oh, you mean black people. Like, that's what you mean.
Oh, man.
Like,
I mean, I laugh because it's so ridiculous, but it's awful. I just...
right. Well,
I
and
can't,
it's not
I
even
can't fathom it.
necessarily about them trying to be shitty necessarily.
No,
You know,
no.
there are people who will be shitty with it naturally, but you know, it's just them trying to deal with an almost unconscious bias, but it's that defensiveness that they get over it that makes it impossible to breach.
Right, right. Like if you address this issue with them, like you said, they in their minds they say, I'm not racist. I'm not racist. But you still say all these terrible things.
Right.
And you clearly have these terrible prejudices. So
right. And you know, everybody's got prejudices. And that's
absolutely.
And that's
well,
what
you
I think.
I both have prejudices. Anybody
Yeah.
listening to this podcast right now has a prejudice.
Right.
You can't get past that because it's just, well, I mean, you can't get past it in terms of how you address it.
Well, that's
like,
the only
long
way
as
you're going to get past it. So.
Right. Right. If you're not aware of them, you can never address them.
Right.
You know, so that's the first step right there. But just walking around pretending like you don't, you know, I mean, that actually gets into the issue of people who try to say they're colorblind. That doesn't
Right.
solve anything.
Yeah.
Ignoring the problem isn't going to solve it. And that's exactly what you're trying to do with your colorblindness. You're trying to literally whitewash the issue away.
Well, they're trying to pretend like they're, you know, really progressive, like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm so awakened because I see past color.
Right.
They're like, well, but that's part of who they are too, though. Yeah,
they're being woke as fuck.
But no, it's a good thing to bring up, and it's a good thing to bring up on the short form because I don't think we could do a long form on this one. I mean, on racism as a whole, we probably could, but
yes,
like
absolutely.
Diet
racism in general,
it's a little harder because you absolutely need to talk to people about it. You know, if you see it happening, address it. But it's hard to lecture someone on it because unfortunately that tends to be a really good way to make somebody who's a diet racist switch to like full sugar racist.
Right. Full sugar racist.
Full sugar racist. It's I don't know. I probably could have come up with a better name for that, but
I've never heard of that before. Is that something you just came up with?
Yeah, I literally I fucking made it up. Well, just because there was that whole bit that College Humor did where they called it diet racism. And so everybody was they were carrying around cans of soda that said diet racist on it. And like they would take a sip of it and they would say something shitty. Like they would like, you know, like, I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying black people are bad. It's just they really seem to be more violent than other races. You know, right. Stuff like that.
It's like the I'm not racist, but
right,
you know.
right, exactly. And so like that's kind of where I got the whole diet racist terminology I've been using from, and then just full sugar racist evolved from there.
All right, and on that note, thank you all again for tuning in to another episode of Pivot Point Rants.
Yep, like, comment, and subscribe, and yeah, we're probably not doing a full form on diet racism, but if you want us to do an episode on racism, or if you have any thoughts on racism as a whole, you know, leave them in the comments, and I'm sure it'll become a flame more quickly.
Absolutely. There'll be nothing wrong that happens with that whatsoever.
No, absolutely not.